Great to be in the Zoom room again. For those of you who have been for the two other calls, you'll know how fun and informative these are, and I'm just so excited to share them with you. We have over 700 people who registered for the event, so we'll see how many people actually show up. But what we do is we have a format where Paula Rizzo and I will talk, and then you all can start asking questions to Paula about your own process, your writing. We're going to talk a lot about accountability and how to sort of find time in your schedule, and also about creating the buzz and what it means to create platform, the sort of pre-launch, the launch, and all that fun stuff that most writers feel really creative about the book part, and then they get to this part and they're like, I don't really want to do this. So Paul is really helpful because she's done it all, and she's also breaks it down in this very manageable way. So I think you'll feel after this call that you can do it too, and that there are a lot of ways to sort of skin the proverbial cat, which is a horrible saying, but it's but you know what we mean. Anyway, so welcome, Paula Rizzo.
Thank you. Excited to chat.
So happy to have you here. So Paula's the best-selling author of the Listful Living books. So Listful Thinking and Listful Living are both bestsellers, and we're going to talk about how she made that happen. But she's also an Emmy award-winning television producer, and does on-camera media training. She does media pitch and story development consulting. So like figuring out the story you want to tell in your book and how to sort of synthesize it and create almost like a tagline or a short story that you can tell to the press to get media attention, or ways to sort of deconstruct the material in order to pull them apart into their own stories and their own pitches, which is really helpful. It's like, how do I do this without telling my own story that I want to be in the book? How do I pull out different pieces and tell those stories in order to get buzz for the book? And then once the book comes out, it's still really fresh. She also does video series development. So like, how do I appear on video? Like what are the ways that I can feel more comfortable on video, even if it's, even if you're wanting to get into, social media video or TikTok or those sorts of things, that's, how do I create kind of a reel or a way to look natural and relaxed on video? And Paula, you do so many other things that I think, we're going to sort of pick your brain during this hour. And I think it's going to be a really rich, full hour because of that. Because some of what I've seen you do over the years is to manage your time in a way that you're able to kind of meet all parts of yourself. You're bringing in the television producer self, but you're also bringing in that very organized, that genius organizer that you have inside. But you're also now starting to switch genres, right? So you're in fiction. It's what you've worked on a lot within Gateless. And just seeing somebody who's able to sort of be and do a lot of the things that they love, I think it feels like an impossibility until we understand that there's strategy and structure behind it. So I kind of want to talk about the architecture of your life, how you're managing to do all of it. And Paula and I know each other because Paula came on a Gateless destination retreat in Paris, and that was the first time that I met her. So that was in 2019, before the pandemic. And then she also came to our classic writing retreat. She did the Gateless Academy, where she worked on her completing her book. So we've sort of been in and out of each other's lives now for 4 or 5 years. And it's been such a pleasure to watch you grow as a writer, Paula, and also just to watch what you're doing professionally. I'm just very grateful for you for coming on and teaching us and talking to us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful to be part of the community. It's been very helpful, but you are, the heart of Gateless. And so it's always nice to be able to chat with you and talk through this, because I get it. There's a lot that authors have to do beyond just write the book. And so I think a lot of times as an author, you want to just say, well, I did the hard work. It's done. Can't the book just speak for itself? It can't. You have to do the talking. And my background in TV really, I think from the very beginning helped to inform, even before I had my books, how I think about things. I was talking to somebody this weekend actually about the idea behind being organized and also being creative. I'm ambidextrous. And so I think that's what is happening in my brain, why I'm able to sort of do a little bit of both, I mean, I write with my left hand, I eat with my left hand, but if I'm going to throw something or do something, it's all right-handed. And so I feel like I'm accessing two sides of my brain in that way. This really organized person, TV producer, deadline oriented, and then there's a little bit of, you bring out the free spirit, muse, creative part, which is very nice because I often stifle that part because it doesn't get things done. And so that's why I think the Gateless retreats were so helpful for me, because I got to get out of being so deadline oriented. Like, I have to produce a piece right now that's finished and ready to go. That has been my experience as a TV producer forever. Like, you have, an hour to finish this. It's good enough. Let's go. Right. And you just get it out there. Publishing is not like that. It takes a long, long time. So I had to learn that.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were working so you were working as a television producer and then you wound up founding your own company. But while you were founding your own company, getting yourself out there, I mean, you live in New York, which demands a certain level of income in order to survive. Like, how were you able, Paula, to create Listful Thinking, Listful Living, and then also work on the novel? Like, what is your sort of, if you had maybe 3 tips, or tricks or whatever that you use to organize your day and organize that creative self, and then that, self that's very structured and architecturally sound, how would you say that you do that?
Well, accountability is one. We can talk about that in depth, because there's a lot of different ways I've been able to do that. For sure, accountability. Second, knowing my own personal productivity style, which I do talk about in Listful Living, my second book, like understanding myself and when I work best and what I need to be most productive. So some people are the type who are going to get up super early in the morning and write and start going, and that's how you feel good. That's not how I feel good. I feel cranky. So I'm not doing that, right? So I know that about myself. I'm actually much better if I write later in the day. And you and I have had discussions about this. Your critic sort of goes to sleep, which is nice when you're a little sleepy. And that's sort of when I like to do a lot of my creative work, my writing. But if I have to, if it's like, well, you've only got between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., I will be creative. I will give myself that structure. So the structure piece also has been very helpful for me to do all of this. So when I was working in TV, I worked in national and local news for years. I booked authors all the time. I always had authors come in. We would do segments with them or not, depending. And so as I was creating, first it was a blog, listproducer.com. It was a blog, and it started, oh my gosh, like 10 years ago. And so this has been like a long journey for me of small little things that I've put out into the world. Let's just see, if I start a blog, what happens? Oh, I guess I could write a book. Okay, how do you write a book proposal? I don't know. So I had to learn that process, right? But what I would do, even with the blog, was that I was very accountable to publishing regularly. And I think that's just my TV brain of always having content out. But I was very good about having, even though I was working full time, really dedicating myself to publishing once a week, twice a week, whatever it was that I had set up for myself. And I had interns helping me at the time. I would be saying like, hey, I want to write a blog post about this, and here's all the stuff that I think about it. And could you just correct my grammar on this? And they would put it into, WordPress or whatever my blog was. So I wasn't doing all of the work myself. I knew what I did well. And then I had other people to help to support me and to keep me accountable, because they were every week saying, are you going to send me that thing? Did you write it? Did you do it? So even with the blog. So, that for me was really helpful. And with Gateless, when I joined the academy, I had just started writing fiction. I mean, I think I had always wanted to write fiction. I always thought that's what being an author means. I never thought I would write a book about list making, But it was the accountability for me that was really helpful, because like every 2 weeks you're submitting a piece and other people are waiting for it, and you are there to help them with their pieces too. So it's nice to sort of have somebody around to to care about what you're doing.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a motivation piece, like people put it into their calendar, they put it into their week, and then they don't do it. And so I mean, for the Gateless Academy, there's right that architecture around it. It's
Yeah.
like you because people are waiting for it. And also you're getting all this positive sort of strengthening craft feedback. So you're like excited to go to the page. But when you're alone, like if you're
Mhm.
not in a situation like that, what do you think motivates you? Like what's the main thing that motivates you to keep doing it? Like to keep sending out pitches, to keep writing the chapters, to keep like, what is it that kind of brings you to your desk?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to finish it. I just feel like that completion piece for me is such a big high. But I also, even before, I knew Gateless and I knew you, I always had accountability not only with the blog but with the two other books. So with Listful Thinking, which is the first one, I had met another woman in New York who was working on a novel at the time. And so she and I were not really close friends, but we liked each other well enough that we would meet on every Saturday afternoon. We would meet in a coffee shop in the East Village. We would chit chat for like 10 minutes. How was your week? What's going on? Okay, great. We'd set a timer for 25 minutes, which is the Pomodoro technique, which I love, which is a, productivity technique. Set our timer for 25 minutes, get on, do our thing, stop, take a break, do it again. And she was working on her thing. I was working on my thing. I've never read her stuff. We just sort of like did this together. I did it again for my second book, with Sarah Montana, actually, who's also a Gateless alumni. And it was really like showing up for somebody else too. Like the times you don't want to do it, it was really helpful. And one of the women that I met on retreat, Bev Sanders, who she and I write together every Friday. So she's my accountability buddy. And we just, pop in on text. Did you write this week? Nope. It's in my calendar, but I missed it. So we show up for each other on Zoom. It's really helpful to be able to do that. But we do it the exact same way. We set the time for 25 minutes on Zoom, and then we just do our thing and just go from there.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? Because that 25 minutes is right before the mind, and the brain science, the right before the mind clicks into the negative bias. So like it's like around 2025. So when we do like the Gateless salons and the Gateless retreats, it's like a quick, and it's amazing how much you can get done in that first 20 or 25 minutes. It's just incredible. And Paula, switching gears, like so pitching on both sides of the desk now, about receiving a pitch and saying like, no, I don't think this is going to fly. And
Yeah.
you also know about pitching and like what has worked, what hasn't worked. So can you tell us, like, first of all, what is the trajectory of somebody to start to get buzz for their book idea or a concept within the book, or even like if someone's writing a novel but it has a strong central character who's a woman and they want to start doing like fun sort of stuff around women's empowerment or something to kind of get themselves in the media? What do you feel like, is the pitch long, is it short, how do you know who to pitch? Like, are you attaching it to something in the zeitgeist or in the like sort of contemporary culture now that can help it? Like, can you tell us a little bit about the magic of a great pitch? Like
Mhm.
how do people start to get into the media?
Well, you start before you're ready. Start way before the book comes out. You can start even before you have the book proposal. And this is something that I did when I had a blog. So I was just writing blog posts about being organized. It's so super nerdy, and list making. And I thought, you know what, if this is ever going to become something, if I want to write a book about this at some point, I need to get some buzz for this. I need to be legitimized as an expert in the list making space. I'm not a professional organizer. That's not, what I do. And so, other than being a TV producer and being very organized and showing that, as something that I do, I didn't have any cred. So I knew media is the way to sort of get that credibility. And so I started pitching myself to magazines, to podcasts. Those are very easy ways to get in, especially podcasts, because you have more time to talk. So now I media train authors all the time, and I work with them to come up with a short, a medium, and a long answer to everything that they talk about. So that it doesn't matter which medium you're on, you know what you're going to say, and you know how much time you can fill depending on, what they give you. TV is going to be really short, and you really need to get to the point very quickly. So you need to know, first off, before you start pitching, who's the audience, right? Who is reading the magazine? Who's listening to the podcast? Who's watching TV? Who's that audience? That's the most important piece, because I would say like 85% of the pitches that I would get were off base. And so that's why I had to say no. I was never going to say yes as a TV producer. It didn't fit my audience. I didn't care about what, school lunch was or something. Like there were no moms watching our show. That was just not the audience. So being able to say, how does this serve them? Not how does it serve you as the author, right? This is not a commercial for you. It truly isn't. It's all about, how can I be of service? How can I give something to the audience that they can take away and truly change their lives tomorrow, right? And that piece makes it a little bit easier, I think, to get rid of imposter syndrome. Because a lot of times we think, oh gosh, who am I to talk about it? It's like, why not you? Why wouldn't you tell somebody something that could help them, And so that's how I would feel with my lists and my list making. It'd be very much, well, I can make people's lives simpler if they knew how to do it the way that I do it, because it works really well. So I should tell them about it. But the pitch itself, the way that I teach it is that there are 3 elements. It's the hook, the twist, and the takeaway. So the hook is, why now? What is going on in the world, and why does this matter? So it could be because it's a holiday, or it's something happened in the news, in the world, that sort of thing. Then the twist is, how is this different than everything I've ever heard about this? So for instance, if we take an example that I had been pitched years ago, a woman named Heidi Hanna wrote a book called Stressaholic. And I'll never forget this pitch, because she and I became good friends through the years. I interviewed her in my books. And the pitch was, I guess it was probably like stress month or something, right? So that's what the hook was. The twist was, how is stress actually good for you? And then the last element is the takeaway. So it's the hook, the twist, and the takeaway. And so the takeaway is literally, what do I take away from this as the viewer that I will do tomorrow? How will this change my life? How will I do something different, right? Am I going to start making green tea or something, tomorrow morning for breakfast instead of eating whatever, something else? But for the stress, she had tips. These are the things you can do to kind of tap into your stress levels to make it work better for you, which was very interesting and very different. So being able to sort of think through, like, what is a counterintuitive hook here? I'm doing a segment. I do segments pretty regular, about, I'd say, once a month for Pix 11 News in New York. And I'm doing one next week on unusual lists to make. So beyond the to-do list, what are some other lists that people should be making? And they liked the pitch. They thought, oh, that's a cool idea. Let's see what does that look like? And I was like, I don't know. It was a good headline, and now I got to figure it out. So now I'm working backwards and working on all of my talking points and figuring it out.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how do you know who to pitch? Like when you're going to pitch that, like, what do you do? I mean, do you just look at the masthead? How do you know for TV? I mean, that's a big deal. How do you know how to?
Yeah, TV is a little bit harder because there is no written masthead. Like with a magazine, you open the magazine or you go to the website and they literally tell you who's the editor for which pieces of the magazine. For TV, for local news, you can call the station. I know no one wants to do that. No one does anymore, but you could literally call and say, hey, who is the producer, or who can I pitch for such and such show? And if you get somebody on the line who is cranky and doesn't want to talk to you, it's fine. Hang up and call back in like 2 hours. It'll be somebody different. and hopefully they'll be a little bit nicer. But now it's a lot easier to get people's email addresses. I feel like years and years ago, it used to be this thing that they would hold and not want you to have. But the truth of the matter is producers want to hear from you. They need new, fresh stories. They need new people to talk to. They always want to have the next best thing. And why it's important to start doing media before your book comes out is because you want to first get the practice and start doing it yourself, start talking about these things and feel more comfortable. And second, you want to get those people on your side, right? You want to be able to have a network of producers and editors and people that then you can pitch later when you have a book, because you know they'll already love you and you've already given such value to their audience without having anything to sell at all, for just the goodness of, because I want to get the information out there. And then you go to them when the book comes out and you say, hey, by the way, I have a book about this. And it worked for me. I mean, I did it twice. It was the same thing. I always kept in touch in between the first book and the second book. I stayed in touch with all the media people. I would continue to pitch. I would be helpful. I would think, what would I like? You know, if maybe I wasn't the best expert for something, I'd say, hey, you know, I just saw this story. I thought it'd be cool. I'm not the person to do it, but I thought it'd be nice. Just be a generally nice person, you know, and you can sort of keep in touch. So LinkedIn, I found to be really helpful to find people to pitch as well. Twitter is excellent as far as media people, because they're always looking on Twitter. It's constant. It's part of their everyday. It's all they're doing. And I have been reached out to before via Twitter for interviews. There was a CBS News reporter who reached out to me about like teleprompters and during the election, and whether or not I thought the candidates were reading off teleprompters. Like, it was such a random thing, but because I had used the hashtag media training in one of my tweets, he found me. So, you know, you kind of need to be out there contributing and giving stuff. They may find you, but it's also good to pitch and let them know that you exist.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And how important do you think social media is? Like, speaking of LinkedIn, speaking of Twitter, like some people say, I'd rather pitch, you know, than do social media. I'd rather like get my favorite, big media, online media, and get my stuff out that way, like, you know, Harvard Business Review and the Cod and the Rumpus and everything like that. But in my social media life, I just feel awkward and da, da, da. Like, what would you say to someone who says that?
You have to be your own producer. You have to be putting out the content, if only for you and your followers, and don't save it. Don't feel like, oh gosh, I have to save it. This is going to be really good for GMA one day. Nah, nothing is new, right? It's all been done and said before. You can reuse what you've said. I feel like a lot of times people are very stingy also with the content of the book. Oh, I don't want to talk about that because then they won't buy the book. Just talk about it. Give it away. It's fine. If they love you, they will love you and they will eat it up and buy everything that you have to offer, right? The objective here is to make them love you, so that it doesn't really matter, right? What you're selling, what book you have, they just want it because they feel that you're so helpful, you know, as the audience. And so I would say, you know, produce all of your own stuff, don't hold it, but you could also use that as a pitch. And I've done that before too, where I'll produce the content myself. And then I'll say to a member of the media, hey, I just wrote this piece about this. Here are some bullet points that I could talk about. So they already see that you've fleshed it out. And I've had people reach out to me as well, some media people that I've connected with through the years, who will see something that I posted, just, you know, resharing an old post. It literally came up. I forget what it was, but it was so, like the power of saying no, or something that I had written a post about literally, I think 7 years ago. And I just reposted it on LinkedIn, and they saw it and they said, hey, we'd love for you to talk about it. Would you come in and do a segment on it? Okay. Such an old concept for me, but sure, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting that it has to serve. I mean, I think that's huge. And I feel like there's another thing that's kind of walking around in the back of my mind about you, which is When you started writing your novel, so Paula's had incredible success with her nonfiction books. She's, just gotten on all the lists, and she's, had incredible success with media and sort of speaking gigs and all of that. And then, her creative self started to knock at the door. And I think that really started in Paris and continued. And what I saw you do was you began to integrate novelists into some of your stuff. Like I remember you invited like the agent for Crawdads, to one of your podcast interviews. And so it's like you have a way of not asking for things from people, but being generous because Pincus, you haven't pitched yet. And so
Right.
you're sort of figuring out about that world. And I saw you gear a little more towards authors in your work. And
Mm-hmm.
as much as we don't need a big platform for fiction, we need a great book. It's still helpful sort of to network. Like I notice in Gateless, when I have somebody who works one-on-one with me, I can connect them with the rest of the community, but it's a lot different than when they do the academy and they know each other and they're writing with each other. And then they tend to not need my introduction because they're like, oh, I was in her pod, so I'm just going to write to her about her agent. Or,
Mm-hmm.
if you're on retreat with people, that's different. And so this networking that I'm seeing you do is preliminary, but it will probably help in the end in terms of just having people that as you go into that process of switching genres.
Definitely. And I feel like that's just the journalist in me, is that I don't know this world. I want to know it better. So who are the key players? Who are the people that I can go to and ask questions to now that serve, more than just me? It's not just about me. I have a lot of clients who are novelists. And I'm trying to figure out also the best way for them to pitch media, because pitching media as a novelist is not
Yeah.
as easy. Nonfiction is much easier. So figure that network and learn from other people, have that piece. I think it's important to sort of surround yourself with it before you in the world.
Paula, are you guys losing her, or am I the only one who's losing her? Tammy, are you
Yeah, I am losing her as
okay?
well.
Let's see if we can Paula, maybe take off your camera and put it on again, love, because we were we were missing you. We heard like a third of that. All right, she might be needing to go off and go on again. I'm gonna see if you guys have questions in the chat while she's going on. I mean, this is really interesting. It can also be extremely overwhelming, I think, for people to think about like, well, she's a television producer, so how do I do this? And I think we start, and there are also a lot of people who are starting small and moving big. And in that starting small phase, it can it can feel like I'm never going to get to the big stage. I'm never going to get to GMA or the Today Show. And in fact, does that matter? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not seeing that there's a lot of difference between those people that that just do a lot of smaller things, or those people that really focus on the big. I think it's just two strategies, and it's sort of what you feel comfortable with. There are so many ways to go about exposure and buzz and that sort of thing. I think the biggest thing is like synthesizing what you have. Like, what am I trying to say that's going to help somebody else? And a lot of times with memoir, because it's like our own story, we don't really know what we're trying. We can't see it. You know what I mean? It's like, well, it's my story. What do I actually have to give? But there are pieces of that story that you can pull out and see, like, well, this little story could tell a lot about, this specific population or this problem, or you know what I mean? So I really want to be able to talk about that today when you're asking questions of like, specifically what are you working on, and specifically what are you trying to get a buzz about, and really helping you think that through so it doesn't feel as overwhelming. Because I would say overwhelm is the biggest sort of block or story that we get around this. So somebody's saying, I would be curious to hear thoughts and suggestions for pitching and growing an audience and sharing content as a memoirist. Yeah, if you could write in the chat, like what specifically you're trying to pitch and grow an audience about, like what's your memoir about? And if you could put that in there and we can kind of start to play with it a little bit and deconstruct it and think about those pitches. And Janice is saying, how does the organization piece come into play with the platform building and the writing? I mean, I would say, you guys, that the platform piece is really important. It's also really important to have a time when you're just being creative. Do you know what I mean? So you want to be able to grow the work in a way that feels like you're having an intimate relationship with it before you start to think about platform. Because often we kind of put that first instead of putting this other very intimate relationship first. And you want voice and the intimate relationship with the work to kind of go hand in hand. It's like, what is this material? And often you have to write and write and write and write until you kind of feel solid. Like, oh, I thought I was writing this memoir about this, but now I'm realizing it's about my mother. Or I thought I was writing a memoir about having a baby at 50, but I'm realizing this is really about breaking stereotypical roles for women. Or I thought, you know what I mean? It's like, once you really get gritty with the work and you let yourself have a relationship with it and be intimate with it, that's when this stuff starts to occur to you. And it really does happen like that. And then you sort of think about, okay, now I know what I'm doing and I have all this material. The book might not be ready, but I can start to sort of write an article about this specific thing. So if it's having a baby at 50, and you're starting to understand that this really is about breaking stereotypical roles for women, or, maybe you're turning around that idea that, like, do we need the nuclear family? Like, what's happening with my child that I'm noticing, like, wow, this is different. He's different than he might have been had he had that nuclear family, or whatever it is that you're noticing that's a broken belief system within the culture. You could write about that and you could do a post on it, or you can pitch on it, or you can, you know what I mean? But you kind of have to do it after you have that deep relationship. It's almost like before you socialize with your person, that you're falling in love with, you have to have a lot of time together. Like, is this a person that I want to introduce to my family? Do I feel like cozy? Am I trustworthy? Do I trust this person? And then you start to sort of extend it and introduce them. And that's sort of a simplified thing. But I hope that helps, Janice, because you have a great memoir and a great sort of trajectory, I think, ahead of you in terms of how much you could talk about your memoir. I know Janice, because she's in the academy.
Suzanne, I'm back. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I got kicked out.
I know you got kicked out. We missed you. We were just like, I was just looking at the chat because people, I think, have a lot of questions, and it's a good segue maybe into questions.
Perfect.
And I'm noticing that, let's see. So Stephanie Green, who's also in the academy, people talk about branding, but it sometimes sounds confining. This is actually a really good question, and one that comes up a lot when people are, for a fiction writer, for instance. Could you talk about that? I mean, I would say for fiction, right, Paula, you don't want to brand yourself in fiction, but you want to find your voice. And once you find your voice, your readers are going to expect that voice. But it doesn't mean you have to do that every time. Finding the voice is sort of, right, it's an outgrowth of really knowing who you are as a writer and and being willing to follow that voice wherever. So even, it's interesting, right? When you look at a writer who has a certain voice, like Daisy Florin, she's part of the Academy, and her novel came out this year. And she's working on another one, and she just showed me the draft the other day. The novels are completely different. I mean, the narrator is completely different age, different socioeconomic status, like all of that. But the voice, there's like the signature voice. And Stephanie, I think for you, I've seen enough of your work within the Academy that you have definitely developed that. You're a literary fiction writer, you have humor, you have a way that the narrator sort of turns and looks like on the sly at the camera, so to speak, and sort of shows us aspects of relationship that aren't usually talked about. Like if you do a mother-daughter scene, there are these aspects that we're like, oh, that's so familiar, but it's so specific to that specific situation that these two characters are in. And I feel like for branding, there isn't really for fiction writers, but there is voice. Would you agree with that, Paula?
And I would add, I think a big misconception that a lot of authors have, fiction or nonfiction, is that the book is the only vehicle for a pitch. Like, I can only talk about the things that are in the book. Like, this book is about this, so this is all I can talk about. And the truth is, that's, especially for fiction, there's so much more that you could talk about, right? Your process as a writer, how you were able to do, like a lot of the things we just talked about, accountability, all of that stuff, that can be used as a way to identify you as the author of this book. And you're not necessarily talking about the details of the book, right? And so I do this all the time. Like the thing that I pitched for next week that I'm doing on Pix 11, you need list. That's not my, it doesn't matter that it's not in the book.
Yeah, we just cut out a little bit again, but I think, it makes sense.
Over.
Okay. And also it's interesting that you're saying this, Paula, because John Lincoln is asking something that's sort of the inverse of that, which is like, if he started a podcast where, a story podcast, he's been on the Moth Radio. He has an incredible radio presence, and has done a lot of that work before. So it seems like a perfect thing for him to do right now. John is also an Academy alumni. And, he is saying, like, if I were to put some of the memoir on Substack, would that be weird, for publishers and agents? I mean, I have seen that be weird for them. Usually they want like it to be all fresh for them. But I think ideas right from the memoir are okay.
Yeah. And I would say for media too, like, I don't think they really care. I mean, the only thing is if you're writing a piece for them, they probably want it to be original, so that would be the only thing. But look, you could read, and I've done this a lot. I worked, or I didn't work for them, but I wrote for Entrepreneur Magazine for a long time. And I basically would just take some of the stuff that I had written before and rework it. If it was 4 ways to do this, I made it 5 ways. And then I kind of reworked the intro, reworked you can still sort of use the same content, but you're going to rework it for their audience and for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like, if it feels good to you, to put some of it on Substack and it makes you feel like excited about continuing, then, I guess why not? Sometimes they'll say, like, how much have you shared this already? Or it's a little different, like with essay collections and story collections, they will sometimes ask, like, have any of these stories been published anywhere else? And if you've gotten awards for them, you've been in the Paris Review or, the back, page of the New York Times Magazine, then that's like likely to catapult you into a sale. Whereas sharing it with the audience, they might, they sometimes shy away a little bit, like how much of this has been in blogs or newsletters or that sort of thing. So you just, you can always take it down if you go towards the sale and they start getting cold feet about that. You have charge over your own content, and that's what's important. But I would say whatever motivates you to finish, to feel celebrated in your writing, to feel like, okay, I can keep going with it is what's most important. And the story podcast is fantastic. So I don't know if you want to put a link on here, Lovey, but it would be great for us to have that link. And then we have a question, Paula, about I'm writing a memoir that'll be finished next May. That's exciting. And it's about how I've grown from trauma and transformed. She's a former PR girl, and will create key messages, good media, Q&A, etc. But I lost 5,000 people off my list after a near fatal car wreck 6 years ago, and I'm back building it again. Could I pitch stories related to growing from trauma and how to see the positives that were put in place prior to the accident? Can I start to pitch myself early and saying my memoir will be ready?
Yes and yes. That's what I would say. You could start pitching stories. You could start writing stories. If you have a Substack or if you have a blog or an email list, you could just start creating the content that you would use as a pitch, and then just start putting it out there. I always am a proponent to do before the book comes out, to just start doing stuff so that you start to get more comfortable with it. They are more comfortable hearing from you. And then also, I think sometimes publishers will say, oh, we're going to hold this until the book comes out, or we're going to hold that. I mean, they're very strategic about the way they want to do things. I get it. They've hired me as a media trainer in the past, many different publishers. And so I get what they tell their authors. They want them to get the pre-sales for the book, and they want them. But I think you should start saying, hey, my forthcoming book, it's coming up, and I'm working on this book. This is a piece from the book, or, you can slip it in there. I did that for years before I had the first book. I would always say I'm working on a book, and then it came out finally.
Interesting. Yeah. To just like set it out there, because so much work is done, you know what I mean? And that it sounds like for this memoirist, like a lot has already been done in the material. So there's expertise there that's not published yet and not celebrated yet. So yeah, why not reference it and say like, this is happening. I'm already doing it. And yeah, I think, and can you say a little bit about rejection, Paula? Because I feel like that's a big part of moving stuff out to the media like this. I've had people that are like, well, I got rejected. I mean, this happens with agents too. It's like people get rejected 10 times and they're done pitching. And it's like, no, you got to pitch sometimes to 100 agents, and then one loves it and you become a bestseller and you're internationally recognized and all this stuff happens. But if you turn around and say, well, no, nobody wants it too early. And so is that the truth with media pitches? Like, how often does rejection happen? What are you seeing?
Oh, it's constant. I mean, you have to assume that you'll be rejected. That's sort of like, unfortunately, that's kind of the game. But what I do is I always think about it as a 1-2 punch. If I'm going to pitch myself, I think, okay, what day am I going to pitch? And then what day am I going to follow up? Because the follow-up is even more important than the pitch itself, than the initial pitch. And I know this as a TV producer for many years, where I would be bombarded with pitches. I mean, thousands of emails a day, where even if I saw something and I thought, oh, that could be good, if I didn't write it on my list, and I'm very organized, if I didn't write it on my list, there it goes, and something else happens, and breaking news is going on, and I have missed it, and off it goes. When that person follows back up with me 3, 4, 5, 2 weeks later and says, hey, repitches it, doesn't just say, what did you think of the below? Because then that gives me homework as the producer to have to go down and reread it. I'm short on time. Make it super easy for me. Repitch. Tell me exactly what you can do. Here's some video clips of me. That's important. Here's some video clips of me talking about XYZ thing on this other media platform or whatever. Or if you don't have that, here's some videos of me doing, a podcast or this or that, whatever you have. Definitely share it if it's for TV. And then that way, I can't tell you how many times I said to a guest, oh, I'm so glad you followed up because I saw this and then something happened and I lost the thread. So I'm so glad that you did this. And for me too, as I was on a podcast that came out yesterday. It's the Hungry Authors podcast, which is very, very good for authors. I had seen it. I really liked it. And I thought, you know what? I'd like to be a guest. Let me put together a pitch. I know how to do this. Put it together. I heard nothing. Crickets. And I was like, I'm a perfect guest for this. Come on. Heard nothing. I followed up because I have that ready to go. I know I'm going to have my follow-up. And then, I got picked to do it. I did the thing with them and it came out yesterday. So you really need to be thinking of this in terms of it's not one and done. They're not going to just see it right away for the most part and just say yes.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, I had a woman that had lunch with one agent who was really interested, and then she wound up flying the agent coop, and the woman self-published. She never issued anyone else. And that's just, I mean, that's fine to self-publish, but if you really want to go big, then you kind of have to keep, and you actually have to keep returning to the agent saying, hey, by the way, I sent you this pitch a month ago. This was just featured. This story of mine was just featured in USA Today. I just wanted to let you know because you're still my first choice or whatever. And often that person, oh, I never saw your pitch. Thanks so much for reaching out again, like you're saying. So it's true. Yeah. So Carolyn Davis this is the thing that I really want to address with you guys about platform. She's saying I'm building my author platform for my as yet unpublished underwater young adult sci-fi. And, she's leaning into relevant talking points like sustainability and climate change. But then she comes into this imposter syndrome, like, I'm not an expert, I shouldn't talk on these things. Any advice there? I mean, Carolyn, I just have to say, like, and Paula, we can talk about this too, because you're forming your first fiction debut as well. The platform for fiction is different. The platform for fiction is networking. Funnily enough, it's like you can get all of that out, in terms of like, and we'll talk about the imposter syndrome because I know Paula has a lot to say about that and is also an expert on like how to get around that. But I just want to say for the call in general, fiction writing is really about knowing other fiction writers and being willing to like read their book, put their book up on Instagram and tag them, reach out to them and say, hey, I just read your book. I love this. You know what I mean? And then you're kind of going to the online symposiums, like all of that work. Like, who did I just mention? Daisy Florin. I just mentioned her. So let's talk about her. She essentially that's how she built her platform. In a way, she was talking about issues that she could have built a platform around, which was like consent on college campuses, the Clinton years and how it changed our lives in terms of, consent and all of that. But she didn't do any of that. She reached out to fiction writers, novelists who were also doing campus novels, who were also doing stuff that had some resonance with her themes. And she became friendly with them. And she said, hey, I have a debut coming out. I'd love to like talk to you or have a Q&A with you. You know what I mean? You can start a podcast and have Q&As with sci-fi young adult authors, and they can get to know you through that. And then they want to exchange agent names with you or, be part of a writer's group, and then find out other people who are working on the same thing so you guys can pitch together. They can give you your network. So that's more how fiction platform building works. But Paula, tell us about that feeling of like anybody can have that feeling of I'm not an expert. How do you get around that?
Definitely. Well, you do have to think through, how can I be of service? How have I been able to use this information or how has this affected me in my life? There was a client that I had, Time Inc. had hired me to media train her. Her debut book was coming out. She was a cookbook author and she was terrified to be on camera. And now she does videos all the time. Like she's on video more than I am, I think. She's like really, really took off. But the thing for her was that she wasn't a trained chef. And so she felt like because I'm not, a trained chef, I feel like people will give me a hard time, that's not really like the technique that you should be using, or that's not really the right way, to handle that ingredient or whatever it was. And so her book, it's called The Vegan 8, and it's all about vegan cooking for better health. And so I said, why'd you write this book? Why'd you go vegan? At the time she was married and her husband had terrible gout. And she noticed that, he had such pain. They had to cancel family vacations. Like it affected their whole life. And she noticed when she started to cook vegan food that the pain went away for him. And he was doing so much better. And so I said, wouldn't you have loved to have that information 2 years ago when your family was struggling? And she said, oh my gosh, of course, I wish I knew. And I said, well, that's who you are right now. You're that person who can help someone else who was in your shoes. This is not about you, right? How dare you keep this information from them? So as soon as I said that like flipped the switch for her. And she said, okay, I got it. I can be helpful to other people like me. And then she was able to sort of do it. I think that's a really good mindset switch to get you to be helpful and to take the spotlight off yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And it came from a personal story, which, nobody can tell you that you're not an expert on your personal story. So,
Sure.
You might not be a relationship expert, but you could talk about, being cheated on, you know what I mean? And you're an expert on that because it just happened to you, and you're going to start with that. And then you're going to start with the 5 things you learned, you know what I mean?
Yep.
how I learned how to deal with liars by marrying one. I mean, you might not be a psychotherapist and you might not be an expert on lying, but you married one. So you kind of learned 5 things. So I think that's so brilliant, like starting with, and also it was her weakest point. It was a place of vulnerability. It was a place that was very hard for her. You know what I mean? And from there came this blooming whole big thing. So I love that. Love that answer. And so there are 2 questions on this that I think are very sort of related. And one of them is, do you have any advice for a novelist using a pseudonym? And how does one do publicity without wanting one's identity
Oh
to
gosh,
be known?
I don't know.
Well, I have some stuff on that one. So because I have an author who's now a New York bestselling author who has been in Gateless, and she used a pseudonym. So we'll talk about that. And then this other one of a woman who started a trilogy, got published the first book, then got a divorce, and so she needs to relaunch with her new single name. So what would you do in that place? So those are sort of similar. It's like I already published something and had this other name. Now I'm publishing these 2 more, and I have to use this this second name. So for the second one, it's a little easier. You just say, IE or whatever the term they use on the cover, like if you look at like Joyce Carol Oates, she writes her mystery crime stuff under a pseudonym, right? And but she wants you to know it's Joyce Carol Oates. So she's like Joyce Carol Oates writing as sort of thing. So you can kind of do something on the cover so they recognize you if you have a big following for that first trilogy. Otherwise, repackage and relaunch the book as a book with this new name on it. You can do either one. And when you do, small, Joyce Carol Oates writing as, and then your name, and then the title, and then first in the trilogy of the second, second in the trilogy of the first name of the first book. So if there's like a lot of markers on the title page where you're like, okay, I recognize who this is. And then you can also let your fans know if you have a list, like, hey, you guys, I went through a horrible divorce and I can't use that name anymore. I hope you'll buy the second in the trilogy. And really telling people on the podcast, like, this is such an interesting thing. It's like I had this identity crash, and but the writing stayed, that story stayed with me, and it was a mainstay throughout my depression and throughout my, what I mean? Like really massaging that story for the audience, because they love an author story and they love to know you guys go through things and that you're the same as I am sitting there and listening. So it's a great story. And you can also write about it. You can launch something that's like, how I changed my name as a novelist, or, what happened when I changed my name as a novelist, that sort of thing. And then writing under a pseudonym is hard, right? Because if you don't want anyone to know, like I once got contacted by this guy who worked really very high up at Disney, product manufacturing at Disney. And he's like, I want to write my book, but I don't want anyone to know that it's me. So I want to use another name. So we could do it, absolutely. But your core base foundation, it's like when John Grisham published A Time to Kill, his first novel, he sold 150 copies. And who did he sell it to? His mom, his dad, his friend, you know what I mean? So there is that core foundational base that's there for you. So if those people can know this is her, but not her, like with Patricia Rexted, who is a Gateless writer, and she is now, very famous mystery writer, and she used a pseudonym. She used another name. And she did it by starting out publishing as, co-publishing with a best-selling author that was already in it. And she got her name on the title page of that. And so we were looking for agents. An agent got in touch and said, I want to publish you, but would you be willing to work with E.L. James first and publish something with them? And then we'll put this other book out. And she did that. And that's how she did it. You can do it. It's the premise that sells a novel. It's not your friends and family necessarily. It's just that you don't have that core foundational base. And some people really like to have that. So I hope that's helpful. It's a longer conversation. I think that's pretty personal. But that's sort of some of it.
Suzanne, what about Duchess Goldblatt?
Yes. Duchess Goldblatt. Well, that was like, the PR they did for Duchess Goldblatt was so fantastic that you were like, that the pseudonym was part of the story. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
Duchess Goldblatt, you guys, is a book that Paul and I both love that's under a pseudonym. And it's like Paul is in love with that book.
I love that book. I love that the Twitter handle. I just love the character, Duchess Goldblatt.
Yeah. So Duchess Goldblatt had this relationship with Lyle Lovett, right? And they were Duchess Goldblatt had this persona on social media that got huge and had a relationship with Lyle Lovett and then wound up writing a book about it. And, it's just this whole very textured story. But that Duchess Goldblatt got a big platform first for being Duchess Goldblatt and then published a book. And so that whole story of the anonymity was part of like the panache or the mystique of getting it published in the first place.
But I would look to, the person who asked the question, I would just look to Duchess Goldblatt as well, just to see how did they do book events? How did they do, because the author never reveals herself. And I think she works in publishing, which is part of the reason why she didn't want to reveal herself.
Yeah, that's right. And she was going through something kind of hard also, which is interesting. We've talked now a couple of times about vulnerability. And how, sharing vulnerability can be so important. And she was a great writer. I mean, she is a great writer, Duchess Goldblatt. Yeah. Okay. My career has been spent writing for others. Now it's time to build my own platform. Yes. If you've done it for other people, you can do it for yourself. I have a LinkedIn profile, but I'm not on any other form of social media and no following. The amount of advice out there for someone starting from scratch is overwhelming. Any pointers, Paula, on where to begin? Many suggest Substack as a spot to get comfortable with blogging. I'd also love to get comfortable on camera. Thank you for any insight. Well, Paula is the perfect person to answer this.
So I would ask, where's your audience? Where do they live? What is the place that they hang out the most? Because then that's where you're going to want to show up. So if it's LinkedIn, like for me, I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. And so I have a bunch of courses on LinkedIn as well about productivity and also media training. And so I do a lot of content on LinkedIn. I do a newsletter on LinkedIn. I also have my own blog that I publish on. And so I would say, where are the people? Do you want to build an email list? Email list is so important. It was one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given. Before I had even I didn't have a blog. I think I had just started my blog. Really, I didn't really have anything. And someone in publishing told me, she said, you should start an email list. And I said, why? Who would I email? Why would I do this? And she said, believe me, you're going to want it. And thankfully I did. And I listened to her. And so I've been building this list for a long time. But that's an important piece of this too, is do not underestimate the power of the email list. And that can be very helpful because you want to keep talking to people, have a relationship with your email list so that when the book does come out, you have people to buy the book. And it's something that your publisher is going to want to know too. Do you have a network of people who care about what you are talking about? And I literally used to hold, I don't know if you even know this, Suzanne, but I used to do a monthly meetup in Manhattan called Lists and Libations. And we would meet every month at a different bar. And I would just meet up with people who loved lists. And we would have drinks and we would chat about, I'd have different themes, it would be like travel lists one time, or we would talk about, whatever. And it was so fun. And it was also very informative for me as an author. I got a lot of good ideas from people and I understood what the hangups were, for list making. So it was really helpful for me to sort of get that as well. But don't underestimate being in person with people too, and then documenting that as a way to be helpful to say, hey, I had a conversation with such and such person and just put that out there. So I wouldn't get crazy with social media. It's not like you have to be on every single platform if it doesn't appeal to you. I was speaking at the Writer's Digest conference about media training, and someone asked, do I have to be on TikTok? And I said, no. Do you want to be on TikTok? And she said, no, I don't want to do it. I said, so then don't do it. If you're not putting your full heart into it, it's going to show.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like, I said to Farnoosh, to Robbie, who just launched, she's also a Gateless writer. She just launched this week. And I mean, she's like, yeah, on GMA and everything. But before she launched, she was like, I feel like I don't have enough. I feel like I don't have enough of a staff. I don't, all this stuff. And I was like, honey, you launch like you live. So do the things that you love and keep doing them and it will happen. It's like, don't try to all of a sudden show up like, a completely different version of the self that like never liked to do the things that you're trying to make it do now. I think and they were great words. But Margaret Ryan, hi, sweetheart, also part of the Gateless Academy and a fantastic writer and working on crime mystery. So she's asking about ageism in publishing. And I think this is really funny, right, Paula? Because Paula just interviewed the agent for Where the Crawdads Sing, and she was
The editor.
the editor. And how old was she when she published that book?
I think close to 70, right? Like she was
70. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It took a long time for her to get that book out into the world. And she had been a nonfiction author. And I think I had read that someone was like, nah, maybe you should self-publish this, or maybe this is not your book or something like that, right? And then finally it became, this amazing, wonderful, brilliant thing.
Yes, exactly. And, Laura Ingalls Wilder, she was 65. Like, I have not seen for that genre, so for novels and so on, that there's ageism. I think we create the genius of age, you know what I mean, for them. So one thing, and I don't know, Paul, if you would agree with this, but one thing that I see in terms of like actually getting the work to the agent and to the publisher is that we're the creatives. So we have to do the creative thinking for them, and we have to show them how to break a mold or how to think differently about something. So, in Margaret's case, she's from across the pond. She has a beautiful accent. She's funny. She's got like this whole corporate, career behind her. And she's also integrated corporate parts into the book, like really playing up the parts of the self that do work in publishing, that are like texturized and different and unique, so that they can see that, so that they don't have to think about, whatever you think your weakness is, which apparently is maybe, thinking of it as age, or being worried that that's part of it. I haven't seen ageism. I've had so many authors go through Gateless who are brilliantly published now, who have been in their 60s and 70s, and they've published, random. I mean, they've published with everybody, and they've done really well in media. But what are you seeing with that, Paula?
Look, it depends sometimes on the outlet, right? But I would also say, like, I'm thinking back when I was a TV producer, I produced health and wellness content, right? And so there would be a lot of doctors. There's a dime a dozen doctors out there, right? I can interview this one or this one or this one. You could say the same thing for authors, but not for your book. So it doesn't matter how old you are. You wrote the book. It's your thing. I'm not going to go find a different person because they're younger than you. You know what I mean? To put them on. The book matters. So the content matters. The how you present yourself matters. How you put yourself out there. That's the difference maker there. It doesn't matter how old or young you are, or what, that does not matter.
No. And Alex Hirsch is asking, like, how can someone who doesn't see themselves as being like Paula Rizzo see, like that are different? Are they also able to do this, particularly with the connections you have and the kind of energy you have? I mean, there's all different people who are showing up on TV and showing up being interviewed and in media. And most writers are introverts, and most writers are, you know what I mean? Right. So talk to that a little bit, Paula.
This is a performance. I mean, you know me in person. I'm like this in person too. So, there's that. But when I talk to my clients about this, it's like, you literally have to fill the room with the sound of your voice. If you're here by yourself, you got to bring the energy. You can't expect someone else to. You have to be the most excited for your book, because no one else will be, right? It's all on you. You really have to do the talking for that book. And it does make a difference to what people will gravitate towards you, right? I mean, it just makes a big difference.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in that question, what I'm reading into that question or hearing in that question is like, am I enough? You know what I mean? Are my connections enough? Is my energy enough? And am I enough to do this as well? And I think that's when Gateless really comes into play. And Alex is asking the question, and she's been on Gateless retreats. She's been in the Gateless Academy. And one thing that's so beautiful about her is, first of all, she's brilliant. And second of all, she's just a genius. I mean, on the page, she's got this incredible way with visual imagery, because she's a painter, and then she's got this kind of wild, wonderful way of showing up in the world. And I think what we have to do when we're learning from somebody who's a lot different from us is turn around and ask, like, well, who am I? And what do I love about myself? I love that, like, my hair goes in a million directions. I love that I've had this very eclectic, artistic background. I love that I'm sort of soft spoken, and yet I have these deeper thoughts about the culture, about, what I'm talking about. And I think really showing up as who you are, uniquely who you are, with a very succinct, prepared message is all you need to do. You don't have to be like Paula. I mean, she's so charismatic. She's so well spoken. She's been in this forever. She has all these connections. It's true. But you can start it too, because you're you. And we don't want a million Paulas. We want a Paula, we want a Fran, we want a Paul, we want to, you know what I mean? We want to look around the world and be interested and be stimulated by everyone we're seeing. We don't want the same. Paul is wonderful, but so are you. So I think
I would also just add about connections there. You know, a lot of times people will say, oh, well, because you worked in the media, right? These are all your friends who are having you on, or these are your friends who are booking you, or this. That is not the case. I get rejected by friends all the time. I have to tell you, even if they work in the media, like, it's just not going to work for us, or we just did something like that. I get it. It's not personal. You know, I still like the person. Maybe something else will hit a different time. Maybe it'll work differently, you know? But for me, it's also been helpful to support other authors. I feel really good about that as an author, because I know how hard it is to put a book out into the world. And if there's anything you can do to help other authors, writing a review on Amazon or on, whatever, like, that does so much for an author. It doesn't take much from you, but I try to give as much as I possibly can, because I want to be the person who shows up for other people to be able to do that, because it's such an important community when it comes to books in that way.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. And Molly, you're asking such an important question. So Molly's asking about, revealing kind of what's actually going on. She's a marketing professional, and she wants to tell her true story about women working in tech, which is huge, pre and post Me Too. And there's somebody else on this call that's actually talked a lot about being a woman in tech and what it feels like and how we can create, like, deep depression. I know that this, Molly, is very needed, and it's a book that could sell very well. And this idea of using a pseudonym, I think Paula's idea of looking at, the other example is the Duchess. The link is in here. Goldblatt. Yeah, my mind was a sieve just then. Is really great, because you could even start a channel, or, like, the anonymity could be part of this. It's like, I am not going to be able to reveal my identity, but I'm on the ground floor of this. And you could start, like, a newsletter, and you could sort of, have people sign up for it, have the email be like, something that reveals, not whistleblower, but something else that's like Me Too. And you could begin, and they won't have to know who's behind that email. And you could send it to all the people, and they don't know that the other person's getting it, and just say, hey, this is starting, and I want to write about this, and I want to tell the truth. And there's a book coming. Would you want to be part of this? And you can build a list, just like Paula is saying with this. The anonymity is like the NDA, everything that we can't talk about when it comes to that world. I think it's a brilliant idea. What do you think, Paula? And then we'll close in a few minutes.
Yeah, the confidential piece of that is so juicy. I think people would definitely be interested, want to know about it. And there's different ways to do this. And Suzanne, can talk about this too. But what was the other Black girl was the fiction book that had come out, I think, last year, and it's fiction, but a lot of it story of what was going on in the publishing, sexism and those types of things. And this woman worked in publishing, and all of those publishers were sort of chomping at the bit to get the publishing rights to that book, and I think now it's on Hulu or Netflix or something. But there are different ways to present it. I love to see examples that are out in the world. Yeah. So I'm constantly like, my friend always teases me. She's like, what are you doing a book report on this week? Because I'm just so curious. I'm always like, oh, let me see, how did they publish that book, or how did they promote that? Let me follow that author and see what they did. I'm just always curious to see what's already out there, what already exists, and how they've done it.
How did they do it? Yeah, like Primary Colors, that's by Anonymous, and that's like this political reveal. So I think, you can fictionalize it. I would say the other thing that I want to leave you guys with is fiction is very, very different in architecture, in craft, and everything, as Paula can tell you, because she's like shifting genres. It's a completely different animal, right? It's like building a panther and now I'm building a mountain or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think it's important, like, that we don't use fictionalization as a tool to tell our story, but to find out like these facts, as you're saying, Malio, are very titillating. They're stimulating as facts. So there are ways, and that's why we're on this call, to like get that platform going so that you can tell the story in the truth of it. You can also fictionalize it if you want to learn the craft of fiction, which I think is a blast. So I'm probably gonna close us up, Paula, because I have a hard stop at 1:15, but I just love you. Like, I feel like we could do this for a really long time together.
For sure. Thank you. The feeling is mutual. I'm thrilled to be a part of this, and thank you all for being here. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me as well.
So I really want to put in the chat, because Paula has some great resources that we want to make sure that you guys know about, and I will also send these in the replay. But Tammy is here on the call, and she's going to stick some of those on. But Paula, can you just tell us a little bit about what you have coming up so that people who want to engage can, like, you have a freebie, you have a course, tell us a little bit.
For sure. So there's a freebie that I created called 10 questions every author needs to answer. And this comes from working one-on-one with authors for so long, and the same things come up again and again. Someone else had mentioned something about, doing a Q&A for your book. That's basically what this is, to be able to come up with questions and answer them in a succinct way. So there's a link there, and you can grab that freebie and, check that out. And it's a good to be thinking about even before you have the book too, because it informs how you talk about everything, right? Oh, you're working on a book. What's it about? Oh gosh, what am I going to say? Right? It's the hardest question that we're asked as authors, even for me, right? With my fiction book, people say, well, what's it about? I'm like, I don't know. I got to ask Suzanne. I'm not sure yet, and there's 100,000 words or whatever it is. It's crazy, too long. So that is the 10 questions. And then I also have a media training course that is study. You can get instant access to it now. It's called Media Ready Author. And it is a video-based course that teaches you how to talk about your book, where to put your book, how to set up your virtual studio, how to talk in sound bites, how to sell more books when you're at events, whether it be in the media or at a bookstore, whatever it is, and comes from my experience as an author, having done this, and also working with many authors one-on-one. And so that is there. And I also have a bonus too. I'm going to do like a bonus session in November, so people can ask questions. We can practice sound bites together if we want to, but you can get access to the course right now.
And are that's like self-study, like you can just do it. You don't have to like be live anywhere or.
Nope. And then if you want to come to the bonus session, you can, but that'll be recorded too. So if you wanted to just kind of be a fly on the wall, you could do that too.
And how much is the course, love?
It's $197. So it is a very accessible course, and it's great for people who are just starting, maybe first time authors, but also people who have done this before and sort of maybe want a refresh and some different eyes. I teach media training much differently, I think, than others do. So it's a good sort of all-encompassing look. And of course, I work with people one-on-one, but that is not accessible to everyone. So I thought this was a good way to be of service and put it out in the world and practice what I preach.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's at a really nice price point for how much you're getting. Sometimes it's like, you want to do the course and then, and then it's like, oh, you can do that and this or whatever. So it's fantastic.
Definitely.
Offering, and even and the freebie is so good too. So yeah, thank you so much, love. I mean, it's just lovely to be with you, and you're so generous and kind to be on here with us all.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about the tech issues, but the show goes on. You have to have a backup. I had to, do what you got to do.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I never get worked up over things like that because we're in a tech age. It's like amazing that anything works.
I know.
Like, how did this happen? You know what I mean? It used to be that I was like playing with the antennas on my TV and expecting to hopefully or not. Go out and play, my mom used to say. Don't watch TV.
Right. Don't be staring at that TV anyway.
No,
well, thank you very
is
much. Thank you all. And feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that you didn't want to ask here. I'm around. Thanks, Suzanne.
We can follow her on social media. Obviously, she has a very good LinkedIn, so you can put
Yes.
that in chat too. All right, love. Thank you so much. It was lovely.
Thank you. Enjoy the day. Bye.
Bye, you guys.